All guests on ZASLOW Show 2.0 brought to us by the official beer of the program. You know, we're talking Johnny Cuba, European roots with that Caribbean soul, a refreshing German lager in a can. Go to johnnycuba.us, use the Johnny locator, find the nearest location to you, pick up a six-pack. How else you can enjoy the start of Week 10 NFL action tonight? Make sure you always drink responsibly, and don't forget Johnny Cuba's mantra, stay tranquilo. Our pal is CBS Sports Fantasy Football expert Jamey Eisenberg, here with us every Thursday, helping us who to start, who to sit. First up, Jamey, first of all, thank you for joining us. How you doing? You all right this morning?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. So just like the NFL had their trade deadline a couple of days ago, fantasy football, maybe your trade deadline's passed, maybe it's coming up. Give me a few players who have been performing really well, who maybe you have some doubts for to finish the season that maybe you could sell high on right now.
I think anytime you have a player that, had like a spike game or some, moments that you don't think are sustainable because maybe some competition is coming or somebody is injured. So in the case of DeAndre Hopkins, for example, just had a huge game Monday night. We know he's paired with Patrick Mahomes, second game that these two guys are together. But that was against Tampa Bay. It's one of the easiest matchups on the table. This week he gets Denver, could struggle. Juju Smith-Schuster may return at some point soon, which could impact DeAndre Hopkins. Maybe toward the end of the season, Marquise Brown is back. So there are some things on the horizon where I think you could say, okay, maybe time to trade him. Some of these older running backs that have an injury track record, Aaron Jones, James Conner, they're getting a lot of work. You could potentially see some pitfalls ahead just based on, again, their careers. Connor, for example, has missed at least 3 games in 5 of the last 6 seasons, and so far he's been healthy and awesome. So he might be somebody you want to try and flip for something that could, help you at some point down the road. I think, when you're looking at trying to trade away assets, you're looking at some teams that are in that 500 range, maybe a game under, maybe a game over, but they just lost a player. So we know the wide receiver position is really beat up by injuries. So again, that's kind of where the Hopkins scenario comes in, try and trade him for maybe a running back on that team's roster or, somebody who's been leaning on Dak Prescott and just lost him for the season, or at least for the foreseeable future. Those are the type of trades you try to make. So anytime, again, you look at older player, track record, injuries, player that's, kind of had a big game out of nowhere, those are the type of things you're trying to move.
And anyone you would target if you were on the other side?
Yeah. So, if you believe, like we just had this conversation, given the news this week, if you believe that CD Lamb will survive with Cooper Rush, there's going to be some panic, in that regard. And he's got a shoulder injury. So there's an injury concern that you have. But, he's still a difference maker that I would like to try and at least see if the risk is worth the reward. Breece Hall has been bad for the last 2 weeks, but the playoff schedule is fantastic. That's another scenario. Look at some of the playoff schedules. So Najee Harris, for example, has been great, 3 straight 100-yard games. Their playoff schedule for fantasy is awful. So you might want to try and trade him away and try to acquire somebody like Breece Hall, who's got a very favorable upcoming schedule. So you're looking for players that are underperforming a little bit. This is a great time to go try and trade for Mike Evans, trade for DK Metcalf, trade for some of the, we have 4 teams on a bye. So you might be able to get Josh Jacobs cheap for a fantasy manager who's, in need of a win this week. Or, if you want to try and buy low on Nick Chubb, for example, who hopefully will be better coming off of his bye week. So you're looking for, a lot of it is scenario based, but, 2 guys that I know I mentioned on our shows this week, Breece Hall and CeeDee Lamb are 2 players I'm trying to actively trade for.
It's a great point that you make there about playoff fantasy schedule. Who are some teams that have brutal playoff fantasy schedules?
Yeah, I haven't really looked so much ahead. I'm not one that really looks past a couple of weeks because so much can change. You see injuries to defenses and whatnot. Pittsburgh definitely comes to mind because for Najee's perspective, they still have 2 games against Baltimore. I believe they have a game against Kansas City or Denver, one of the 2 in there, which are 2 good run defenses, or a good run defense. I think it's Kansas City. So that's one that stands out. And the Jets, by comparison, one that's on the favorable side, just again because looking at it, their matchups get very good for both passing game, Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, and the run game for Breece Hall. So those are 2 that stood out to me. All
right, so tonight, Bengals at Ravens, getting Week 10 started. This is a great game. The Ravens, they lost. Their 5-game win streak was snapped. They lost. They got back on track last week. The Bengals, I kind of feel like the Bengals are coming. So they certainly need this game tonight. What do we like?
You like a lot. You wish T. Higgins was playing this game, but without Higgins there, it's opened the door for, former Dolphins player Mike Gesicki to step up and play, at a very high level. He's now had 4 games this season where Higgins has not played. 3 of them he's been amazing, essentially 12.3 PPR points or more. It should be 14.3 because he had a fumble in the game against Philadelphia, but 3 in a row, and he just had a 2-touchdown game against the Raiders. So Ravens are susceptible to tight ends. Gesicki's a top 5 tight end for me this week, which I never thought I would say that. Jamar Chase should have a big game. Joe Burrow's been fantastic. And they've unlocked Chase Brown. Last week, he was my start of the week. Performed much better than I expected. And the best thing about it was he was involved in the passing game. Now we have to keep an eye on Khalil Herbert, who they just traded for on Tuesday, but that's really a Zach Moss replacement. Not really, I think, something that's going to impact Chase Brown. Moss is placed on IR with a neck injury. And then for the Ravens, look, it's now game 2 with Deontay Johnson. So you want to see if he will do something after they traded for him last week. And as we've seen, it's taking a couple of weeks before some of these receivers who are acquired midseason to step up. Devontae Adams took 3 games. DeAndre Hopkins took 2 games. So hopefully Deontay Johnson is going to take only, the 1 game and then perform well in tonight's matchup. But hard to trust him right now. So I don't know if you want to buy into Deontay Johnson just yet. But clearly Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, for the most part, 3 of those guys are must-start guys. And Mark Andrews hopefully continues to get back on track.
I want to ask you about the Patriots and Bears, which is a 1:00 game on Sunday. Drake May, he's looked the part. So what do we make of the Patriots side? And are we disappointed at all with the Bears offense, which I think a lot of people had high hopes for?
Little disappointing. They had a good stretch prior to their bye week. They came off their bye and a little sluggish. DeAndre Swift has kind of been a nice, steady presence after a slow start, so I don't really worry about him. But really, you're seeing Caleb Williams, Matt Eberflus, Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator there and head coach. There seems to be a little bit disjointed, which has trickled down to the receivers. Keenan Allen's got 17 targets in his last 2 games, has really done nothing with it. Romo Dunze's coming off a 100-yard game. Typically you see rookie receivers start to step up as the season goes on. DJ Moore is a little tough to trust right now, despite the fact that he's still amazing, but just getting targets, just not producing with them, and could struggle a little bit with Christian Gonzalez, who's the top cornerback for the Patriots. You mentioned Drake May. We love running quarterbacks when they're successful, and he's had a great stretch of just running the ball. He had a 95-yard rushing game, had a 46-yard game, and a touchdown in the half against the Jets before he left with a concussion. And I think, again, if we're starting to look ahead for fantasy managers, bye weeks are going to kill a lot of people right now. 11, 12, and 14 are tough bye weeks. 10 week 10 also.
Jamey, is this the latest? Are there always bye weeks in week 14?
There were last year. There is unfortunately again this year. But just in terms of Drake May, before we get there, week 12 he gets the Dolphins, and we know the Dolphins. I know that statistically they're good against quarterbacks, but a lot of that was because teams were running on them early in the season. I think Drake May is a good sleeper to stash for that week 12 game against Miami.
Yeah, it's like I saw earlier in the season, week 14 bye weeks, and I mean, man, that's probably the last week of your fantasy football season, a lot of leagues. And to have guys on a bye, that sucks.
Yeah, there are some analyst leagues where, because there's a lot of people that play in these, one in particular called the Scott Fish Bowl, playoffs start in week 14. So you're in trouble if you have, a lot of guys on a bye that week.
Broncos and Chiefs, that's at 1:00 on Sunday, specifically Kansas City. I know you've mentioned a bit about DeAndre Hopkins. I think he's a major addition. Obviously, you can make a case they sell high right now, but for instance, I have DeAndre Hopkins on my fantasy team. I'm very excited moving forward.
You should be. Again, there's a difference between selling high and riding the wave. If you need DeAndre Hopkins and you want to see how this plays out, it's the best quarterback he's ever played with, obviously, and picked up the system pretty quickly. Got 9 targets, 8 catches, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns. But again, he was facing Tampa Bay, which almost everybody has success against the Bucs. Let's see what he does against this Broncos defense, which for the most part has locked down every number 1 wide receiver because of Patrick Surtain II. So I think it's going to be a little tough for him. And then, it's just a matter of, do you get frustrated with him, knowing that the schedule is not exactly easy moving forward? But look, that was the game you wanted to see. You wanted to see easy matchup, come out, establish yourself as the go-to guy for Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes leans on him. Andy Reid trusts him. Rashee Rice was putting up great numbers when he was healthy. Juju Smith-Schuster had the one healthy game, was fantastic. Now it's DeAndre Hopkins' turn, so hopefully he keeps it up.
Eagles, Cowboys, specifically Dallas. I feel like you got to start everybody on Philadelphia. So also specifically Dallas, what do we do with Prescott out?
So My guess is, Prescott's going to miss at least 4 games and maybe shut down for the season because they're 3-5. And if he's, got as serious a hamstring injury as potentially reported, why would you try to rush him back knowing that this season's probably lost? So Cooper Rush started 5 games in 2022. He averaged around 15 fantasy points per game. That's not great for a quarterback, but Superflex 2 quarterback leagues, you'll take that as a bye week or injury replacement. Really, it's about 3 players at this point for me. It's about CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, and Rico Dowdle. Lamb is still a must-start receiver. We've seen receivers that have had downgrades of quarterbacks struggle. We've seen them perform moderately okay, and we've seen guys obviously still excel. You have a 5-game sample size with CeeDee Lamb and Cooper Rush. He was on pace for right around 100, I think 105 catches, 1,200 yards, and 7 touchdowns over a 17-game season. So I think Lamb will be okay. Just goes from, for me, a top 10 receiver slam dunk to more of a top 15 variety. Rico Dowdle's coming off his best game of the season, over 100 total yards. He's got back-to-back games with 5 catches. He's got 3 touchdown receptions in his last 4 games. So hopefully that's something that they could build toward with or without Dak. I don't know how much Dak was helping him based on how he's played. And then Jake Ferguson goes from a slam dunk must-start tight end to one of those fringe guys, that we, put him in the category with Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta and Kyle Pitts and that group, the guys that you hope are playing well, but, just haven't been consistent. And hopefully, Cooper Rush continues to lean on him. Tough matchup this week for him, though, against Philadelphia. So if you can bench him, I would bench him.
All right, Jamey, I don't normally ask you about Monday Night Football, but it's the Dolphins this week. So let me finish here with the Dolphins and Rams. Monday night, what do we like?
Like almost everybody, the one guy that you want to see get going at this point is Jalen Waddle. I mean, obviously Tyreek Hill hasn't had a big performance yet with Tua, but there's no worry there because he's still getting opportunities and they'll come. I mean, Buffalo's defense is really good. The thing that's concerning for Waddle is that, all the check down passes are going to Devon Achane, who's just been an absolute monster. The 4 games that Tua has started, he's 20 plus PPR points. The breakout candidate has lived up to it. So as long as he stays healthy, he's going to be a top 5 running back, maybe top 3. Waddle has just been disappointing. 2 catches, negative yards, scored a touchdown, which saved you if you started him. But just the production has not been there. He has not gone over 10 PPR points since week 1. A lot of that has to do with Tua missing time, but 2 games now with Tua, and just the targets have not been there for him. So I hope there's a squeaky wheel game coming. We just saw, for example, Jackson Smith and Jigba absolutely destroy the secondary. So there's potential for both Dolphins receivers. Now, personally, I would sit Jalen Waddle if you can, just because you need to see it first. But hopefully, we get a good game, and then you can buy back into him moving forward. Tua's a borderline must start, and Raheem Mostert more of a flex, but you don't like the 2 fumbles in the last 3 games, and you wonder if they give Jalen Wright a few more opportunities, but clearly Devon Achane leading the way. For the Rams, look, as long as Puka Nacua doesn't throw one of the weakest punches I've ever seen for a guy that got ejected last week, he's a must-start player. Cooper Kupp's back to being a must-start player. Matthew Stafford has now had 2 straight games with his receivers healthy that he's performed well. And Demarcus Robinson, he's got 4 touchdowns in the 2 games that the receivers have been healthy, Puka and Cooper Kupp. You go back to last year, he scored 4 touchdowns in the last 5 games of the season. So it's easy to say it's fluky, but at the same time, there's a history here of Matthew Stafford throwing him touchdowns when the other guys are still on the field. So he could be a number 3 receiver for this matchup as well.
Jamey, excellent job as always. Tell everybody how they can hear you leading up to tonight's game and over the weekend.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You could check us out, our podcast, Fantasy Football Today. You can find it where podcasts are available. You can check us out on YouTube as well. CBSSports.com is where all of our content is, written and video. And you can check us out on our streaming network, which is CBS Sports HQ.
Excellent job, Jamey. Thank you, pal. We'll talk next week, man.
I appreciate it. Thank you.